and welcome to the Friday edition of the Morning Pitt. Glad to be here with you. As we head toward the weekend, we're at the end of the week, and just about, depending on when you watch this video, about 24 hours away from Pitt taking on Rhode Island at Acrisure Stadium tomorrow, noon kickoff. Of course, we'll have plenty of coverage heading into and coming out of the game on Panther-Lair.com. You see the website right there, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. And for the Friday episode here of the Morning Pitt here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com, figure we just give some final thoughts heading into the game and look around, not necessarily the rest of the ACC, but the rest of the country. Pitt sitting in the rankings at number 24 in the AP poll. What games around the Panthers could potentially impact their rankings? So we'll talk about that in addition to sort of giving some final preview of this game of Pitt, Rhode Island. I mean, it's an FCS game. You know, it's a game against an FCS opponent, and more often than not, those games tend to go a certain way, and they should go a certain way. If you are who you believe yourself to be, you should be able to win these games comfortably and pad stats a little bit and really kind of build up your numbers. And for reference, I was looking over the New Hampshire game last year. When Pitt played New Hampshire at the end of September, final game of the non-conference schedule, final game of September, and 77-7 blowout. It was the bounce back game from the Western Michigan loss last year. And I mean, just absurd stats. Kenny Pickett's 24 of 28 for 403 yards and 5 touchdowns. I mean, that's a pretty ridiculous total. Rodney Hammond goes for 100 yards and 3 touchdowns on 17 carries. Izzy Abanikanda had 75 yards and 1 touchdown on 13 carries. Vincent Davis, 7 carries for 50 yards. Jordan Addison went 6 for $179 and 3 scores. Izzy Abanikanda caught 4 passes for 55 yards. Shockey Jacques Louis had 4 for 50 and a touchdown. Taysier Mack scored a touchdown. This is the kind of game that it should be. I mean, really, the thing that was missing was the sacks. They only had 3 sacks in the game, which I was a little bit surprised to learn. I'll tell you another fun fact, curious fact. When I went to ESPN's website to look at the box score from the Pitt New Hampshire game from a year ago, Pitt's leading tackler, Wendell Davis, had 5 total tackles, and someone else named Dune Smith, D-U-N-E, Dune Smith, had 5 tackles. I said, who the heck is Dune Smith? Who is Dune Smith? I've never heard of Dune Smith, so I click on it. Apparently, it's the artist formerly known as Leslie Smith. You remember him? He was a linebacker, transferred to Southern Illinois this past offseason. Apparently, he now goes by Dune Smith. And so when you look at Pitt's, because it sort of updates the on ESPN's website, it's sort of tied to a player. When they update that player's profile, change the name on there, it changes how they show up even in old box scores, apparently. And so Dune Smith had 5 tackles for Pitt against New Hampshire last year. A little curiosity. But, I mean, that's the kind of game that this should be. That's the kind of stat line. Those are the kinds of stat lines that you should see. I don't necessarily, I mean, you guys know what I think. I almost don't need to repeat it. I don't necessarily need to see Keaton Slovis throw 28 passes in this game. I don't need to see him play long enough into this game to attempt 28 passes. I don't need to see him past halftime, and if it were up to me, I wouldn't see him past the end of the first quarter. I've come to accept that he's probably going to play more than I think he should. I've come to accept that Izzy Abanikanda is probably going to play more than I think he should. That's fine. If that's what the coaches feel like they need to do or want to do, or if it's what helps them best to head into the 8-game ACC schedule, knock yourself out. I'll probably still write about it in the 3-2-1 column today because, it's been sort of my crusade for the week is to get minimal playing time for Abanikanda and Slovis, but that's neither here nor there. But it should be that kind of game. Not necessarily 77-7, but a game where you pile up stats. And I think sacks are a big one. Rhode Island is 57th in FCS in sacks allowed. They've given up 2 per game, 6 total through 3 games so far at the FCS level. You should be able to get somewhere in that neighborhood. I mean, you should double Rhode Island's sacks allowed total. I think in this game, you should be able to get 5 or 6 sacks against Rhode Island because, as Pat Narduzzi said yesterday, Pitt's defense has been close. They've had guys that are right there to get the quarterback, and they just haven't been able to corral the quarterback or make the play. They need to be able to finish those plays in this game tomorrow. as a boost, to go into ACC play. And I think if you look at this game as a potential, I mean, that word that I just used, a boost for ACC play, you want guys feeling confident. You want guys feeling comfortable on the field. I asked Pat Narduzzi yesterday about Solomon DeShields. He had his first career sack out of the Delta package on third down late in the game at Western Michigan. And I actually, we have a picture of him right there on the screen, or we did a minute ago, of him making that sack. And I asked Pat Narduzzi, I said, look, he got a sack. Is that the kind of play that can be sort of a catalyst or a boost for a young player who, is looking for really the first big play of his career? And he said, absolutely. He said DeShields was very close to a sack earlier in the season and missed it. And he was really excited and hyped to get back out there and make his first big play. And he did that against Western Michigan. I think he could build off of that, in this game tomorrow, and then really hit the ground running in the ACC with a fair amount of confidence. And I think, that can go for DeShields. I think it can go for, really Bengali Kamara. I think Tyler Wiltz as well, even though he's a guy who's played a lot of football and had a lot of success, even if it's at the FCS level. Those young safeties that I talked about and talked about all week. I think even guys like Kanate Mumfield, who seems to be getting into a little bit of a groove, or at least he did at Western Michigan. Jaden Bradley, who Pat Narduzzi talked about yesterday. Jalen Barton, who I've talked about a lot this week. Carter Johnson, who I've talked about a lot this week. Nate Yarnell, because I think he needs to get at least a half in this game. This can be a good opportunity. Now, you're not going to crown anyone based on what they do against an FCS opponent. But I think what can happen for the players is just getting comfortable making plays. Just what it feels like to have the ball hit your hands, what it feels like to wrap up the quarterback, what it feels like to win off the edge, what it feels like to defend, different types of deep patterns and things like that. There's so much that it's just a feel. Because one of the things Pat Narduzzi has said the most this summer is, about the difference between practice and the game. And he's talked about how Bengali Kamara he's told this story multiple times, that Bengali Kamara came out of the West Virginia game saying, Coach, it's a lot different in the game than it was in practice. And I think he's an interesting one that Narduzzi often cites, because Kamara really was one of the stars of training camp. He was one of the stars of practice, and a guy that had as much hype as anyone coming out of camp. And you know that if you've watched these Morning Pitt videos, you've watched the live Panther-Lair show or anything like that, read stuff I've written on Panther-Lair.com, I've been hyping up Bengali Kamara since, the spring, and certainly throughout training camp, as we just kept hearing more and more rave reviews of his performance in practice. Well, you get into a game and it's a little different. And the more experience you can get for, particularly the inexperienced guys, the more experience you can get for them in a game, so they understand the difference in speed, so they understand how you have to play and what it's like to actually prepare for that, and how you have to adjust your preparation. It's crucial. It's hugely valuable. And so, never mind Slovis and Abanikanda. I'll probably continue to argue about their usage depending on what the coaches decide to do with them. But Yarnell, absolutely. Mumfield and Bub Means, absolutely. Barton and Bradley, absolutely. Carter Johnson, like I said. And then on defense, some of those younger players on defense, keep getting them up to speed. Guys have been thrust into action maybe more than they expected, in the last couple of weeks. A guy like Bam Brema playing as much as he did at Western Michigan. I think he played like 17 snaps or something. It's got to be a career high for him. That's good. That's good for him, and it's good for Pitt's depth. The circumstances are not ideal. You don't want that many defensive ends to be out. But now you're a little better prepared for the next time you run into that situation. Bam Brema is a little better prepared himself for the next time that situation arises. You want the same thing for your backup linebackers and your backup safeties and all the younger players who are lacking in experience. It makes you a deeper team to get this kind of experience. And a game against a team like Rhode Island, an FCS opponent, should provide that kind of opportunity. We know it's not a gimme. We've seen, we don't even need to go to the 2012 Youngstown State game. We've seen the 2017 Youngstown State game, which went to overtime. The 2015 Youngstown State game, which I think was a one-possession game. The 2019 Delaware game, which was a one-possession game where they maybe took the advice I'm espousing this week and rested a lot of guys and tried to take it easy on how many guys they actually used. We've seen those kinds of games, but more often than not, we've seen games maybe not quite as extreme as last year. The 2014 Delaware game comes to mind. I think that was 62-0. which might have been more dominant than the 77 to nothing. I guess 77 to 7. Excuse me. I guess that's a 70-point win as opposed to a 62-point win. So Paul Chryst and his group was really slacking back in 2014. But even something like Villanova in 2016, a 28 to 7 game, just a comfortable win. Comfortable win is probably the best thing to have, or best way to put it. It might end up looking like a blowout like last year, or it might just be a comfortable win. But get reps for as many guys as you can. Don't be conservative in who you bring off the bench or the situations you use them in. You want guys to get experience in the red zone on both sides of the ball, in the middle of the field on both sides of the ball, backed up against the other, the other goal line on both sides of the ball. You want experience in all those situations, so they're a little better prepared on how to react if they're called into duty against Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, North Carolina, et cetera, et cetera. Miami obviously lurking there at the end of the season. So, like I say, Rhode Island, we'll see what kind of challenge they can put up. It's interesting looking at Rhode Island's roster, though. We talk so much about transfers, and we know how big a role transfers play in college football nowadays. The transfer portal is a significant source of roster and personnel and talent acquisition. And Rhode Island has certainly done that. I was kind of glancing over their roster, just looking at the FBS transfers, because they have a few Ivy League and FCS transfers, but just FBS teams. They've got 4 players who transferred from Rutgers, 1 from Boston College, 1 from Tennessee, who we'll talk about in a second. A kicker from Notre Dame transferred into Rhode Island, 1 transfer from Miami, 1 from Maryland, 1 from Old Dominion, 1 from Connecticut, 1 from Fresno State, 1 from UMass, and 1 from Georgia Southern. So that's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 transfers from FBS schools on Rhode Island's roster this season. And, as we talk about, is a school like Pitt or a school like Georgia Tech going to get picked off by the quote-unquote big boys, a Jordan Addison going to USC, a Jahmyr Gibbs going from Georgia Tech to Alabama. It also works the other way, that some of these guys who maybe don't cut it at the FBS level, or don't cut it at the Power 5 level, can look at the Group of 5 level. And if they don't cut it maybe in the FBS level, they can look at the FCS level and look for opportunities to play. And one of the most notable transfers, and a guy that you're going to see a lot of and probably hear a lot about during the game, is Kasim Hill. He's a 4-star prospect, 4-star quarterback prospect in the class of 2017. That's the same class as Kenny Pickett and Hendon Hooker, and a few other guys that Pitt has sort of faced over the years. He initially signed with Maryland, went to Maryland. I think he redshirted his first year and then started 10 games, actually, as a redshirt freshman before he got hurt and ended up losing the job. He transferred to Tennessee, where he was there for, I think, a year, mostly on the scout team, and now is at Rhode Island. Kasim Hill, I think he's the all-time leading passer in Rhode Island history. Could be wrong about that. Or maybe he's just thrown for 3,000 yards during his time at Rhode Island. Either way, this year he's completed 52.8% of his passes for 705 yards, 6 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. He's been sacked 6 times, so that cuts into his rushing yardage. Rushing isn't really a big part of his game. He's rushed, I think he's in total, I think he has recorded 30 rushing attempts, but those include sacks. 30 rushing attempts, gained about 80 yards, lost 50 some. So, either between running plays or sacks, he has lost a lot of yardage, ends up with like 30 rushing attempts for like a net gain of 24 yards or something like that. But he's mostly going to be a drop back passer. He was a pro-style quarterback prospect coming out of high school, and that's mostly what his game is. Not a high completion percentage when you're sub 53% there. 705 yards through 3 games, not a ton. I think they're averaging about 235 passing yards per game. This is a team that does run the ball quite a bit, 161 rushing yards per game, and it all works out to about 30 points per game. All in all, for a team that's mostly playing FCS opponents, not overwhelming numbers, not the kind of numbers that you're going to say, holy cow, this is a potent offense. There's not a lot to see there. They've given up a little less than 30 points per game on defense, but I don't think you look down the roster, and despite all those FBS transfers and a guy like Hill, like I said, was a 4-star prospect coming out of high school, there's not a lot that really scares you too much. Again, this should be the kind of game where Pitt plays well. I think they have about 11 sacks. Rhode Island has recorded a decent number of sacks through 3 games. And so maybe you watch out for the protection a little bit. But if ever there was a game where Pitt's offensive line should take a big step forward or at least reassert themselves a little bit after they were okay against Western Michigan, this should be it. This should be a game where they can hold up and protect Keaton Slovis or Nate Yarnell or whoever else gets out there at quarterback. Pat Narduzzi said yesterday that, he said Slovis is ready to roll. He said Nate Yarnell is ready to roll. Nick Patty is ready to roll. Not so sure about that last one, but that's okay. We'll give it to you, Pat. We'll take your word for it, and we'll see if Patty is, in fact, ready to roll against Rhode Island. So Pitt will have that game. Should be a win, you would think, to improve to 3-1 as they finish up September. And, I don't think anybody expects a win over Rhode Island to be a major boost in the national rankings in the polls. They're number 24 in the AP poll this week. Of course, we know they dropped. They dropped a spot. They dropped from 23 to 24, basically swapped places with Texas A&M. Not because they lost, but because Texas A&M beat Miami, who was ranked number 13 at the time. Miami dropped to number 25 as a result. So what about this week? There's probably nothing you can do against Rhode Island that's going to, on its own sort of merits, bump you up in the rankings. If you lose, you're obviously going to drop out. There's no question about that. I don't think, if you win 77-7, I don't think anybody's going to say, wow, you know what, Pitt's better than we thought, or they should be ranked higher than 24. It's going to mostly, just like last week, it's going to depend on what happens around you. Pitt didn't drop in the rankings or climb in the rankings based on its win at Western Michigan, but they did drop because Texas A&M beat Miami. So let's look around Pitt and see what could possibly happen there. Speaking of A&M at number 23, they're hosting number 10 Arkansas, and they're actually favored by 2. So that's a very interesting game. Top 10 team going on the road against a top 25 team. The top 25 team giving 2 points. You take the road dogs of the number 10 Arkansas Razorbacks. Either way, that's a game to keep an eye on because even though they're playing the number 10 team in the country, if Texas A&M were to lose, they would fall. So that's a potential spot Pitt could make up. Number 22 team in the country, Texas, is at Texas Tech. Texas is favored by a touchdown in that game. I don't know a lot about Texas Tech to see how they are, but again, one to possibly keep an eye on. Obviously, if they win, they're not going to fall. But if Texas were to lose, particularly as touchdown favorites, there's a possible another spot that Pitt could jump, although that's going to be a tough one. I am looking at number 21, Wake Forest, though. Hosting Clemson. Clemson's number 5 in the country. Clemson is a touchdown favorite at Wake Forest. Here's a road favorite, a road touchdown favorite. You like the home dogs there? And I'm not talking about to cover, but to win outright. That seems like a tough one for Wake. For all that Wake has accomplished, I'm not sure they're ready to get over that hill just quite yet and beat Clemson, even if the game is at home. And then number 20, Florida, is going to Tennessee, who's now ranked number 11. Meteoric rise for Tennessee after beating Pitt 2 weeks ago. Tennessee is 10.5 point favorites against Florida at home. All right, so you look over these teams right ahead of Pitt, right? Pitt's at 24. You look at 23, 22, 21, and 20. 3 out of those 4, well, no, 2 out of those 4 are underdogs, Florida and Wake Forest. And then you have A&M at home against a top 10 team that's only favored by 2 points. So, you have the potential for maybe as many as 3 losses there. And if that happens, all 3 of those teams will fall beneath Pitt. So you're looking at potentially going from 24 up to, maybe up to 21, potentially. Assuming Texas can beat Texas Tech, you assume Texas will also move up and stay ahead of Pitt, but you have a chance to climb back to 21 or possibly 20. And the one other interesting game that I'm looking at here, because, 19 and 18, BYU is number 19. They're hosting Wyoming, 21.5 point favorites. Washington is number 18. They're hosting Stanford. They're 2 touchdown favorites. But number 17, Baylor, is at Iowa State. Iowa State's unranked, but favored by 2.5 points. So there again, let's say Wake Forest, Florida, and A&M all lose. All right, that's 3 spots Pitt could jump up. if Baylor loses at Iowa State, possibly a fourth spot that could bump Pitt back up to number 20. Again, you're not going to get a big boost on your own merits of beating Rhode Island, but you might be able to climb if other teams falter. Those are the ones that I'd be really looking at. If you're going to have rooting interest this weekend based on other teams in the rankings to, in order for Pitt to get a boost in the polls, you're rooting for Clemson to beat Wake Forest, you're rooting for Tennessee to beat Florida, you're rooting for Arkansas to beat A&M, and maybe you're hoping for the upset of Texas Tech beating Texas. And then you want Iowa State to beat Baylor. I mean, there's a chance to move up anywhere from 3 to 5 spots there, depending on how those games go, because I think Pitt would jump just about every one of those teams if they were to lose. So that's your rooting interest for the weekend as far as Pitt's ranking and the teams and the games that could affect Pitt's ranking. We'll keep an eye on those and see what happens. Of course, we'll recap all those things on Monday and Tuesdays. I guess Monday we'll kind of go over the rankings and why Pitt moved up or stayed where they were or whatever the case may be. Tuesday we'll recap the Coastal and all that as we do here on the Morning Pitt. Remember, we release these videos every morning, Monday through Friday, just to get you up to speed on whatever's going on in the world of Pitt. It's football, basketball, recruiting, whatever's happening. We talked a lot of recruiting on yesterday's Morning Pitt. The day before that, we talked about 6 players to watch in this weekend's game. It's that kind of stuff. It's just a daily rundown of anything going on and anything you need to know about regarding Pitt sports. All powered by Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. We do this stuff right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you get an alert whenever we go live or release a new video or whatever anytime we put something new on YouTube. After tomorrow night's game or tomorrow afternoon's game, we're going to go live, not right after the game, probably a little bit later in the day, maybe around 8 o'clock or so. We'll be live to break it all down and talk with you about the game. Don't know exact start time yet. I'll probably tweet it out at some point. But if you just have your notifications turned on and you get your alerts sent to your phone, you'll know when we go live. So you won't have to worry about, I missed the tweet. What time are they starting? I don't even know. I don't want to miss the post-game show. Turn on the notifications, and then you'll never miss it. Also, like this video. We appreciate that and appreciate everyone's support and engagement throughout the week. It's been a lot of fun. I think we've been doing these Morning Pitt videos for about a month now, and it's been fun. It's been I think it's been a really fun addition to our coverage. And it's been a lot of fun doing the videos. It's been, fun coming up with things to talk about each day and sitting down and chatting with you for a little bit every morning. So we appreciate everybody who's been following us and supporting us, hitting that like button, hitting the subscribe button. All those things are very much appreciated right here. So that's it for today. Hope you had a great week. Hope you have a great Friday night, a great weekend. And like I say, we will talk to you after the game, probably around 8 or 8:30 tomorrow night, Saturday night, to break down Pitt's game against Rhode Island, which should be a win. We'll definitely have plenty to talk about, win or lose, and probably more to talk about if it's a loss, but we'll have plenty to talk about if it's a win for sure. So make sure you tune in and join the post-game show tomorrow night, and then we'll be back with more episodes of the Morning Pitt next week, right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.